And welcome back to another edition of the Debrief podcast. I'm Josh Durso, joined as always by Jackie Augustine. We're here in the FingerLakes1.com studio talking politics. Jackie, welcome back. Wow, it has been a crazy week and a half, 2 weeks.
It sure has. Yeah,
Last week, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, wow, are we gonna have enough to talk about? Are we gonna?
Yeah.
And every time I feel like I think that, something ridiculous and crazy happens. And
maybe you've sent your worry out into the universe that there's not going to be enough stuff to talk about, and all of a sudden it just floods in.
So, headlines over the last week have been centered firmly in Geneva.
Yeah.
For a bunch of reasons. The big story, I would say, in the last week or so, some postings to social media that were questionable. I'll say questionable at the very least.
Right.
So give us an update on where things stand there and what you've kind of been seeing unfold.
Well, I don't really know what's going on in terms of the status of the investigation the police department is conducting or any of the kind of official news. But the community dialogue, I think, has been pretty interesting. And, I wrote a column about it, and I've gotten a lot of feedback about that, positive and negative. And it seems to be that, there are a group of people who don't seem to understand why it's a big deal, which I have come up with this analogy. And when I explained this to a couple of people, one person wrote back and said, okay, that makes sense to me. But I still don't think it's that bad, which I don't quite understand. But so I asked people to imagine that they have a kid, and their kid, let's say, is being bullied for weight issues, right? And let's say they're on Facebook and they see the teacher's post, and their profile picture is like some T-shirt that says like, only skinny people count, or only, don't talk to me if you're fat, or something like that. And I would think that the parent of a child being bullied for a weight issue might say, that doesn't seem like something a teacher should be posting, even on their free time, right? Because when we think about it, there are certain positions where A, we expect community values to be upheld, and B, there isn't really free time. Like you give up your free association when you join certain activities, when you take on certain roles. And I think that the compensation and the retirement packages are tailored to try and compensate, and I can't think of a better word, for that kind of fact that you're really on duty even when you're off duty. So, I think a lot of people are like, oh, this was careless, without wanting to say that it's wrong. I find it to be both wrong and careless. But my whole point through all this has been, if something like that happened in a school, some people might just say, well, I want to protect my kid and I want that teacher out. But other people might say, you know what? I want to ask the question of why all the teacher friends who saw this posting and who participated in this or liked it or otherwise let it go on for a while, why they thought it was okay. And that's been my question, and that was my question for the column. Like, where are we going wrong as a community that we aren't self-policing, that we aren't understanding that we're all responsible for each other?
I guess where I come down on this, and it's the issue of what was posted is almost irrelevant in terms of how I kind of view approaching this type of situation. It doesn't matter what was posted. If you run a business and an employee does something on or off the clock that is damaging to that business's reputation, that person, under New York state law, can lose their job. Pretty self-explanatory, basic concept. Without getting into the specifics of the right and wrong, the obvious wrong of posting the kinds of things that this individual did, I think it's a pretty simple situation, the nuts and bolts of it. It seems to me anyway, because, this is what frustrates me. What I've heard a lot of people say is, well, he was just posting it to Facebook. The internet is a real thing.
Right.
It is a real, tangible thing, and the things you say and do on the internet can and will impact your livelihood.
Right.
I am so tired of listening to people talk about the internet like it's this sort of like sideshow circus where
free for all.
Reality doesn't matter.
Right.
What people, there's no accountability, none of that. At the end of the day, saying something online is the same as saying it in front of 100,000 people. Likewise, it's the same as walking up to Jackie Augustine in the middle of the street and saying whatever it is that you posted online.
Right.
So this really, to me, is just a pretty simple matter of this person did something that damaged the reputation of the entity he worked for, and the result. And as far as I've seen, there have been a lot of statements from the city manager, the police chief. The city has issued a couple different statements. They issued a statement to Facebook first. If that doesn't sort of quell this whole concept that the internet isn't a real thing.
And, right.
So, whether he's employed by the police department now or not, the city needs to act accordingly to rectify this. Again, establish a plan so that this doesn't happen again. Right. I can't believe, especially in 2017, that any business or organization doesn't have a social media policy.
Right.
I find that very hard to believe.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I agree with you.
And the last leg of that, by the way, is just to then, after you have a plan and you know it's not going to happen again, or you know how you're going to handle it, is then move forward from that situation.
Yeah, but how does that happen? Because that's my concern. I'm worried, and this is, several people have said to me, you sound like an apologist for this officer because you're not asking for him to immediately be fired. And I, in full disclosure, this is someone I went to high school with, someone I considered to the limited extent that we had any interaction to be, a nice guy. But that is not what's influencing my judgment. It's that my concern is that I don't see this as simply a social media gaffe, a act of carelessness, I don't see the offense as being doing something that brings trouble to the organization. Now, I understand from the city's point of view, that is going to be their primary focus. And it's up to them to deal with that how they see fit, right? And I trust that that'll play out however it needs to play out. But for me, it is about the content because it is a symptom of a struggle that Geneva has had for years, and that it's very clear to me we haven't quite figured out the solution to yet. And that is this issue of trust and respect and mutual understanding when it comes to community policing. What does that even mean? I mean, it's not just about the police going out into the community. It's got to be about the community values being part of the police department. And I think it is a disadvantage to the officers that really do take the community values to heart for there not to be a system that automatically recognizes and can shut down things that are directly contrary to that put the whole operation at risk. So that That's what I see as the bigger issue. And I understand it's controversial, and sometimes it's very difficult for people to talk about law enforcement issues without being accused of being either having blinders on and being pro-police or being rabidly anti-police. And I think if our community can't get past that polarization and just really talk about strategies, then we're gonna be in trouble. It's a bad situation.
Okay, so I think piggybacking off of what you just said, this was when something like this happens, it kind of seems like people look for, and like you just said it, he needs to lose his job. That's the the instant reaction to something like this happening. That very well may be part of the solution, but that's not the whole solution.
Right.
And it kind of feeds into this whole, like, people will automatically look for that quick and easy fix.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he did something bad, fire him, done, there.
Yeah.
Like it never happened. But you have to have, to what you're saying, I feel, at least I think this is where you're going, there has to be, like, policy, there has to be reason, there has to be a discussion, there has to be details to, like, the whole, how you're executing, how you're moving forward, so that it doesn't just happen again in 2 years or 3 years. Even if it happens again in 10 years, people are going to remember this, and they're going to say, well, wait a second, we've been down this road before. Shouldn't we be able to come up with something?
Right. And that's why I just wanted to point out the fact that for me, the vocalization of this attitude, as evidenced by posting this, is easier to handle than the silence that let this continue, right? Because that is harder to identify and wrap your head around. So I think it's easy for people to say, well, okay, yes, some city councilors who want to look sympathetic to the cause might join Councilor Gramling, who unfortunately I feel like always gets put on the hot seat for these issues. Like, oh my goodness, something's going on that affects the community of color. We better ask Councilor Gramling what to do. And, I feel like that is actually perpetuating the problem. If we don't all embrace these issues and say, these are our issues to solve together, this is not the community of color's problem to solve. In fact, to the extent that we expect that, it just perpetuates the problem. So, I don't want to see other counselors saying, yeah, I want this guy fired. Let me pat myself on the back for being really progressive and a champion for social justice. That is not the solution. That is not, like you said, it might be a part of the solution, but that is not the crux of the issue. And if you don't have the conversation because you're afraid of what people are going to think of you or what they might say about you or if they might misunderstand your position, then you're not doing your job. Mm-hmm. That's what I worry about. Who is going to stand up in the city and do their job and say, we need to engage the community about what this says about our general operations? Now,
another part of this sort of that I keep mulling over in my mind, and I'm curious what you think, is how does the more national dialogue on this topic, this whole, it's as simple as, like, President Donald Trump is perpetuating something that is now, in some senses, being replicated.
Right.
Now, sure, on the local level, we can say, we need to have this conversation, we need to have this dialogue. But it seems to be that no matter what happens, the national trends kind of become the local trends, and there is this kind of, like, meshing. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder, how much can a local dialogue, short of an incredibly thorough policy, an incredibly thorough review of how you got to where you are, which requires a lot of taking a hard look in the mirror, mm-hmm. How do you achieve it? Because really what winds up happening is a lot of these, like, sort of 25 to 30% fixes, we'll call them. Like, it's not a complete glaze over the top, but it's kind of, just barely maybe an inch or two below the surface.
Right.
Instead of digging down all the way down to the bottom to churn everything up. How does the dialogue, how can you fix it and create a dialogue when the regional, state, and national dialogue is so out of step?
Yeah, I mean, these are the things that keep me up at night, right? There are so many facets of these issues that seem so big and overwhelming. But for me, I mean, for years, people used to make fun of me, like, what do you care about local stuff? Why don't you go do national stuff where it really matters? And I have come firmly to the conclusion that no, like, the local stuff is the only chance you have to actually make something better. And you know what? Geneva is a model community. Geneva has, demographically, we are a mini America. Mm-hmm. If we can get things right here, we can set an example that will, instead of trickle down, it will be kind of trickle up, right?
Right.
And that is because I believe that people in Geneva, fundamentally, like I think about all Americans, want to care about each other. I think we're told all the time not to. I think we're told, keep to yourself, mind your own business, take care of your own. But fundamentally, I think people want to care about one another. And locally, that's the best way you can actually put that into practice. Know your neighbor, care about your neighbor, look out for your neighbor. And, I believe that. That's a core value of mine. And right. I think Geneva can do this. I think if people are willing to approach it from a position of caring about one another, not about cutting people down, not about exposing, like in kind of a gotcha way, what's bad, but saying, you know what, we're going to have pardon the expression, but we're just going to have a little come to Jesus meeting here, and we're going to say, here's what's really going on. Here is how some people are experiencing life in Geneva because of other people's actions, and we are going to figure this out together. I mean, it's like a family. How do you manage your family dynamics? I mean, you don't just say, well, guess what? Like, now I don't care about you anymore. I mean, maybe some families do, but they shouldn't. They shouldn't. You say, we're going to get to the bottom of this and figure it out. And it's difficult, and it's hard, and it takes a lot of work and effort, and people have to be willing to put in the effort. Mm-hmm. And I trust that Geneva is. I'm eternally optimistic. I believe that the city, the police department, the community, there are people of goodwill who want to put in the work to get this right.
So speaking of a community that needs a little work, Seneca Falls.
That's a good segue.
Seneca Falls, the town board was dealt what I would consider a loss, pretty significant loss if passing a local law was a significant mark on their
right.
Administration. The courts have annulled the local law number 2. They directed the town board to issue a positive declaration in the SEQRA process, pinged them for a SEQRA violation, violation of the open meeting law. It was just, okay, so...
It's a mess. We can just call it what it is. It was a mess.
It's wild, and I kind of wonder at this stage, so back to local law number 3 now. So for those who don't remember, wasn't that long ago, last December, local law number 3 of 2016 was passed. That law did a mixed bag of things, but the main thing within that law that was important to people was the no landfill shall operate in Seneca Falls beyond December 31st, 2025. That date was important to people. Mm-hmm. Now, this decision, coming literally weeks, about 3-4 weeks after, 5 weeks after the DEC public hearing, really, really interesting because I think there's I can't help but wonder if that's going to impact the DEC's decision in some way, shape, or form. Because
I don't know.
It's something that, and this is just a hunch, no one will ever know what actually the DEC is considering.
Right.
When it all comes down to it. They hear testimony and then they go behind closed doors and they ultimately make a decision. Mm-hmm. That said, this decision, and I'm sure this decision will be fought in court. I'm sure this is essentially going to be the new clay mine issue now, where it will be challenged in a new.
You think so? You think the town is going to spend its resources to appeal a decision showing that it did the wrong thing?
Well, I think the town could very easily move forward into a new local law process and just start the whole thing over again.
Right, they could.
And that would mean once passed, if passed, another Article 78, more court. Right. And it just goes back to this whole point that Seneca Falls is not in the position that it once was. There was a point a few years ago when things may have been slowing down or things may have seemed bleak. Okay. We had a lot of people, a lot of members of the community who said, economic development isn't happening, no jobs, people are leaving, we've got a landfill, we've got all these things. And for all of the strides that the community has made since in economic development, in hosting some really interesting events that bring people not just from the region, but from literally all over the world.
Right.
And to have that just, once again, it's bogged down in this entire landfill debate. And here we are now with local law number 3 back on the books. Now, does that mean Seneca Meadows will come back and once again open litigation or try to challenge Seneca Falls in some way, shape, or form? So here we are. It's like we just turned the clock back to winter last year, and we're back again. And I know a lot of people are considering this a huge win for their cause, the people who are fighting against landfill operations in Seneca Falls. But truthfully, this isn't just a one and done issue now. This is something that, this is going to keep going. It's going to keep grinding, and we have elections, and then you get into next year, January 1, when you have potentially new faces on a board.
Right.
Or a new makeup of that board where you pick one person up and you move them to a new seat, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. What kind of message does that send to the community that this is the headline?
Yep.
Every single week, every single month. It seems to be at a lot of the board meetings now, it's geared almost wholly towards the landfill. Mm-hmm. And it's frustration, I guess, because it seems to be that at some point somebody's going to have to say, and it's going to have, obviously it has to be a member of the administration itself, a board member or the supervisor, someone is going to have to say, okay, enough is enough. We're going to start getting out front. We're going to start getting vocal. We're going to start voicing all of these concerns with regard to everything else that needs to be addressed in Seneca Falls.
Yeah, I mean, I can hear your frustration in the way in which this eclipses the other business that the town needs to attend to. But let me just say, I consider the decision a win for the community, but maybe not necessarily for the reason that you're describing. Not because it actually settles the landfill issue, because I agree with you, it certainly does not. Although I do think the town board would be wrong, that's the only word that comes to mind that really fits, to appeal the decision, because a town board essentially being reprimanded and then trying to appeal their way out of that would really seem like a lot of hubris. Not that this board has lacked hubris, so it's not beyond the realm of possibility. But, I had a discussion. I told you I had a discussion with Supervisor Lazzaro, and I'd be happy to continue that discussion, about how he, and I'm going to specifically call him out as the head of the Seneca Falls town government, how he convenes his meetings, conducts their discussions, how he proceeds. This is a procedural win for the community, because this decision, which thank you for including the link to the full decision, because people should read it. People should see what Judge Coker is saying about
not that long.
What was done. Right.
It's not that long. It's 7 pages. It'll take you a max of like 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's great. It's not a bunch of like legal speak. It's very accessible. It's easy to read. And what is consistently repeated is this idea about this due diligence and having to consider and take a hard look at potential environmental impact. And by environmental impact, under SEQRA, it's not just impact on the physical environment. It's the economic environment, the social environment, you know. So again, I mean, we said on our show, this is not an I told you so moment, but I'm just pointing out that we have said on the show, and I did speak these same words in my conversation with the supervisor, that if a proper procedure is not followed, the community feels unsettled. And the trouble that you're seeing at the meetings that he's trying to control is really of his own making by doing things in a haphazard or incorrect way. And I think this decision is a way of showing the town board, hey, you rushed it, you were sloppy, you're bringing these problems on yourself, so how about if this is what you really want to do, you at least do it the right way. And that, to me, is a win to the community, because a lot of what I've been hearing is people saying, this feels like a done deal, they're not following the proper procedure, they just, after the election, you know, we get some new faces, they say they're going to do this no matter what, and now they've done it, and it doesn't feel right. Well, that's because it wasn't right. So, and that's, again, Judge Coker doesn't speak to the merits of the case. He's not saying there is an affirmative environmental impact of any particular kind, right? He says that's not for him to decide, and that's correct. But they didn't do the due diligence.
I think one of the lines in one of the lines in the decision that I read basically said that no one ever brought any evidence forward to show what any environmental impacts would be beyond 2025 of having a landfill present or operational.
Right.
And
yes. I'm pulling the decision.
That's kind of the,
yeah.
I mean, that's one of the more obvious, you know, if you are going to proclaim that there was no, or there will be no impact,
right,
at the very least you have to provide some data to, you know, back that claim up.
Right. Right.
You know, you can take them at their word that they are doing the right things out there at Seneca Meadows and that they're doing their job the best they possibly can. But you also have to procedurally, you have to provide some data to actually, you know, back up. When you're making a proclamation, you have to have some data to back it up. You can't just say, well, this is right for the community, or this is right in the spirit of the agreement we have with Seneca Meadows or anything else like that. You just have to actually provide the context.
Yeah, and I mean, as I tried to explain at the time, you know, during my time in Geneva on the city council, we had to have a positive declaration, if even just a type 1, about a whole range of things that you would think are totally inconsequential by comparison to the landfill operation.
Right.
So I found it really implausible, and this is something I understand the supervisor and I don't see eye to eye about. I found it really implausible that they would issue a negative declaration, not even a type 1, just a negative declaration, because that is really supposed to be reserved for the most minor, innocuous things, right? Like you want to put a statue on a waterfront or something. You know, you want to do something that's not a business endeavor, that's not something that has infrastructure development. But anything that, I mean, it just...
Something that doesn't have millions of dollars of infrastructure built into it by definition. Yeah.
So I'm just thinking, like, all you have to do is be a student of regional government to see how SEQRA works in other communities. I mean, of course this was a miss. So, yeah. So I feel like it's a win for the community for process. Now it's up to the town board to decide, will they learn from this? Do they take it seriously? And will it cause them to look at things any differently? I hope so. I hope so.
Now, as we head into our last couple topics here, just some kind of interesting little developments, because I know last time we were here, you said you were really interested to see how things shaped up with the Seneca County Board of Supervisors.
Right.
And one of those supervisors lost his primary. Junior Supervisor Greg Wadhams lost his primary race, so he will not be on the ballot in November. Two other individuals will, one of his board members and then an individual who was a supervisor in the past. That was probably the big surprise, because most of the primaries in the region were pretty mundane. There weren't any big upsets or anything like that. The two DA races, right, of course, made headlines. Ritz and Porsche won, respectively, their Republican primaries, but will both most likely face off against their opponents in November's election, because they've managed to win other lines.
Right.
Their opponents have.
Yeah, I think it's identical, right? They're shaping up to be.
Yes. So it looks like Sapio, as of yesterday, had won the, after counting absentee ballots, Joe Sapio had won the independents and conservative lines. But both, I believe what I had seen, under 100 votes in both of those, which is typical for the smaller non-major party races. But interesting, because I think after, at least in Seneca County, it seemed after Porsche's decisive Republican primary win, a lot of people figured that Sapio would just bow out and, that would be the end of it. But it looks like he will be continuing. That said, you wonder how much of a legitimate challenge an individual can mount from one of the non-primary lines.
Right.
But then again, local elections.
Yep.
We've seen, people create their own party.
Yeah, that's how I ended up on city council at first. Yeah, but yep.
But so I guess to that point, what does it take to actually win an election, especially a county election? What must it take to win an election on one of those non-primary lines?
Yeah, I think that's very difficult. I mean, it's near impossible, because it's rare to win an election on an invented party line,
right,
in general. And I think it's only possible when you really have made personal contact with all the voters and you've actually developed a message that resonates with people. Mm-hmm. In a countywide race, the possibility, and I mean personal contact, I don't mean a mailer, I don't mean somebody putting something on your door, right. I mean actually talking to people.
Yeah.
And in a countywide race, that's near impossible if you're actually going to do your job at the same time, right? You shouldn't be using your work time to do that. So I think that's really an uphill climb. But I continue, and I want to say this again because it continues to bother me, that I am disappointed in the Democratic parties in both counties, because the democratic process is about having people in a race to talk about issues. You put up a challenger. Sometimes that person's not going to win, but you want to have a conversation, and that's a way of allowing the community to pay attention and have a conversation about issues. If the Democrats in both counties think these seats don't matter, that they didn't even feel, not that they had to go out and get their own candidate, but they didn't want to endorse any of the people who were already expressing an interest, makes it sound like maybe that position isn't of concern, which then makes me think, should it be elected at all if it's not a position of concern? But these decisions that are made by people who get elected, they matter. So what is a political party for if not to take a position on this kind of stuff? So I feel like that was punting.
I did think it was pretty interesting to see the turnout the way it was. at least in the Seneca County primaries, to see, what I think was probably close to 2,000 or in the upper teens, cast ballots. Seems pretty impressive for a primary. I just wonder if that because this was a very heated, with the DA's race, it was a very heated primary. I wonder if that if that continues, or if we kind of see the same or a little less turnout for the actual elections.
Yeah, I think if people think it's a foregone conclusion that the main party line person's going to win, I do think that suppresses turnout. But boy,
granted, there are a lot of other people running in
Right.
November, especially here in Seneca County. So that may not even be a factor. But
I think it is saying something that in all of Seneca County, a turnout of around 2,000 is characterized as impressive. I mean, that's not a criticism of what you're saying, but I'm just saying that's a relative assessment, right? Given that turnout in local elections is so low historically, then yes, this by comparison seems noteworthy. But geez Louise, why aren't people voting? People complain. There isn't anybody I've ever met who, even if they say they don't care about politics, hasn't complained at least once about something someone has done in an elected office. So why aren't they voting? I've never understood people who don't vote.
Well, and interestingly, I believe there was either one or two races in Cuba County primaries that were decided by less than 20 total votes. There were a couple that were in single digits even. Right. So that's the kind of roadblock that exists, and I do not know. I know we've vaguely discussed this before. Yeah. I do not know how you fix turnout. I don't know how you can't force people to go out and vote. That's undemocratic in its definition. And you can't incentivize it, because then you get into a weird gray area where you're pay to play.
Right. We should have a jury duty system where people, if we can't get voter turnout above 50%, guess what? We're just going to call numbers, and then you've got to serve on the town board for a while. That'll get people voting, because nobody wants to do this. Nobody in their right mind wants to be in local government. I hate to say it. Having done it, I can tell you only do it if times are desperate and you feel you're the only possible person coming forward to be part of it. But the people who say they want to do it, that makes me a little worried. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how you get more people voting, but people should vote. It's the least you can do, right? It's the least you can do for your community.
So last topic of the day, we're back to talking about this. We're back to school time, so I guess this is kind of fitting. Yeah. The Excelsior Scholarship. When you walked in, I had an article sitting right on your desk. So here's what I wrote. I just basically jotted down some notes of my feelings about the Excelsior Scholarship now that we're in its first iteration, its first run. No one can identify the costs. The state isn't really making clear who's signed up, how many people have signed up. And now we've learned that they can't legally run the ad that they had originally intended to run and what ran on TV on any digital platforms.
Right.
Which is wild. They didn't even buy the rights to it. Which is so I said to you, where are all of those prospective college students lurking?
Yeah.
They're on the internet.
Yep.
They're not watching Channel 8. They're not watching the 5 o'clock news. Yeah. So I guess and a lot of the, that Politico story was shared to Facebook, and a lot of the comments following it were to the tone of, well, of course, it was just Governor Cuomo's big ploy to make this one of his big calling cards, and he didn't really care who it reached. This was just going to be something that he could hang on a campaign banner. And I remember saying that in a column when this whole thing was first being discussed.
I remember that.
And it's one of those things, it's why no one could see it.
Yeah.
No one saw this coming. You didn't see this scenario sort of shaking out. He spent millions of dollars for this to be on TV,
right.
where, guess what? Big swaths of voters, because voters skew older than they do younger, are sitting down watching TV. They are that generation and didn't pay one mind to the kids who are actually going to be benefiting from the program.
Right.
And in the best case scenario, so I was kind of running through these different scenarios in my mind. The best case scenario is that this was an effort to keep costs down on the project, because then less people would sign up and it would cost less and less cost to the state. And oh my God, if that's as good as it gets.
That's insidious. Oh, that's assuming the worst. Yeah. I mean, in my opinion,
because to me, the worst case scenario is that it was just a political chip.
Right.
And
I don't understand the advertising dollars thing at all, because if you've got this program, the only thing you need to do is make sure the financial aid officers at every public university know how to help people apply. Because I can tell you, I mean, going through this process with my son, kids going to college are looking for every dollar they can find to help pay for it if they need it, right? If they're not if their parents aren't just writing a check or something. So why do you need to advertise it at all? Like, if it exists and people know, and the financial aid people know how to get people signed up for it, there you go. But to your point, if you think it needs to be advertised and you're trying to reach the target demographic, this is a miss. This is a total, it's not my miss for the day. I have a different miss. But this is definitely a miss if it has not even reached the people that would benefit from it. Now, I mean, maybe what they're thinking is, well, if we get to the parents, they'll make sure their kids sign up. But I'm not sure that
So here we go. I'm going to jump into this little, and you must see it. You must hear it. Parents have a very, very, very limited knowledge base when it comes to getting their kids into school. They don't know the process. The FAFSA process is a nightmare.
Right.
The whole thing, literally, organizations and businesses and colleges have programs and events set up just to help people get in the door.
Right.
And this whole thing, so you run a 25 or 30-second ad, and probably more like a 15-second ad.
Right.
And you don't help them at all. You file for it, and it's part of the FAFSA process, and it has a weird deadline, and it's confusing, and it's no more simple than, because this is billed as kind of like this free tuition, overly simple solution to a big problem.
Right.
Well, if you make less than $125,000 a year, you get to go to school for free. One, that's not actually how it works.
Right.
And two, it takes a lot of work to get there.
Yes.
And to just simply say, oh, if you make less than $125,000 a year, good on you, you're going to go to school for free, that really paints it as this overly simplistic concept.
Right.
It's not. It's the last stop. It's the last stopper. That's all this is. It's the supplement to the supplement to the supplement.
Yeah, and we talked about before how it doesn't cover room and board, and I think that for a lot of parents who are unfamiliar with how the college application and funding process works, the sticker shock comes when you get the room and board portion. So that, again, this seems to me like a program like this, because, hey, I am all for more access to education. 3 cheers for that. I'm not sure this achieves that, but let's say it does. Let's say it helps. The people who are actually going to administer it, who are going to make sure that people have what they need to file, are the college financial aid officers. So you don't need to invest any dollars anywhere else, because they are the ones helping parents through the process and helping the students through the process. And as long as they know what to do, it'll get done. But yeah, I can't imagine that, if my kid was going to a SUNY school, that I would see the ad and call up and be like, okay, I'm sending in my 1-page form, and now please, send me my check of reimbursing my tuition, or, take it off his bill. It doesn't work that way. So I don't know. I think spending any money on advertising at all was a waste. That could have gone back into the program. And I'm still reserving judgment on the program as a whole because I agree with the goal. I'm not sure this is the vehicle.
Right. Now, that can jump us into our hits and misses. And because my miss glides right into this topic,
okay,
I'm just going to go right ahead.
Right.
So New York State is spending what I assume will be millions and or billions of dollars when all is said and done to get students of all ages in the door to these various universities. Mm-hmm. Now, we're running a story later today. It's going to be running tonight around midnight, so you'll read it tomorrow morning.
Ooh, breaking news.
Not quite breaking news, but just kind of like a wow moment. So it looks at all of our area schools, and it looks at the student loan default rates at all of the community colleges in the area. And what seems to be, so I originally it was a Syracuse.com story, and I started to do some digging on some of the other topics that they were talking about. And it seems to be that the big concern, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit as somebody who actually works in a school.
And has a lot of student loans.
Is this whole idea of getting them in the door isn't the issue. Keeping them there and getting them done is the issue. Mm-hmm. That's where the focus needs to be. Yeah. Because, looking at the rates at which it takes in community colleges, that I understand they skew high and they take on a higher risk student technically. But for, graduation rates to just barely get up to around 60% after 6 years at a community college, something is wrong with the system.
Yeah.
That doesn't jive.
Yeah.
And, it starts, 3 years, it's only like 20%, 22%. Wow. That to me is a huge, huge, huge miss. And for the state to dump money into getting people in the door when it seems pretty clear that colleges haven't really figured out how to get people through the door once they're actually in the door. Right. That's a problem, especially when you're continuing to perpetuate this whole concept that, college is necessary for success. It's crucial for success. You can't be successful if you don't go to college. I think that, no matter, this is always a liberal versus conservative. Conservatives will say you don't need college. You can just do trade schools and this, that. This is what I hear all the time. But that's not for everybody, just like a 4-year education isn't for everybody. There's a balance there, and it has to be on a case-by-case basis. And trying to apply these, this is where I'm going to end this, trying to apply these big, massive, broad stroke solutions to these really, really diverse, complicated problems is not a way to solve anything. Right. Period.
No, I agree with you. I agree. I would say the community college retention issue is different than the 4-year school retention issue, because I do think a lot of people not completing community college are having economic issues, because community college in theory is supposed to be your entree to higher education, where you can still have a job, you can have more flexible scheduling, you don't have to live on a campus, you can be working. And I did a year at community college. It worked for me. That was really helpful. And I think that that's important. I think if we tied more incentives that we give to universities to their actual outcomes, we'd be better off. And this is actually a column that hasn't made it into the paper yet, but I'm still hoping we'll see the light of day. Mm-hmm. That the New York Times did this really good assessment of private institutions, not public institutions, and their economic outcomes for lower income students versus like the top 1%. And that, you got to ask yourself, with all the incentives that go to higher education in terms of tax breaks and other incentives, are we getting our money's worth? Because while I do agree that education is great and people should have access to as much education as they want and need to enrich their lives, I don't think a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree is something everyone needs to have a successful life. I mean, people have different interests and different talents, and we need to find a way to support a whole range there so that people can choose what they want to do and be supported in that. But all that said, yeah, I'm interested. I'm eager to read the story because this needs more discussion.
And my hit for the week, I struggled to even come up with one, but after living through the last couple weeks, I would say my hit was actually the turnout, the voter turnout. I know that's kind of sad that that's where we are, but that's where we are, and that's good. When we're applauding a 2,000 human turnout for a primary in a county that I think its population is up near like 30,000 people, that's the state of politics, and it could be a lot worse. And seeing those single digit and teens turnouts, it's very easy to get there.
Right.
So that's why I'm happy to at least have seen some engagement in this month's primary. What about you?
My miss is Del Lago getting the IDA pilot incentive for like another hotel. I forget the name of the group that's actually developing the hotel.
I believe it's going to be a Hilton hotel,
but
developed by a group out of Rochester.
Right, but affiliated with Del Lago.
Right.
And you've got the New York Times that had an article this morning talking about how the promises of economic development through Cuomo's casino program have not really panned out, and that the concern is that really in the first 6 months, the interest and the amount of revenue generated is supposed to be a good benchmark, because that's kind of when it's new and people are checking it out, so it kind of spikes and then you expect it to level. But this casino and the other one that they were citing, which now I'm forgetting, but it was downstate, maybe in Binghamton or Catskills area, and some of the racinos are really missing their targets. And the question is, how much have the local communities given up in terms of tax revenue in order to attract entities that maybe made promises that aren't being kept? So my concern was seeing that the projections are being missed. The granting of a pilot agreement seems premature to me. Now, I understand people would argue, well, you got to get more hotels in order to boost the revenue. But my point is, people need to come in with a business model that works, and if you give it a chance and you test it and they're missing the mark, then maybe you aren't as open-minded and forgiving the second time they're coming for another ask. So I'm just generally skeptical of pilot agreements for-profit entities as a general rule. My miss? No, that was my miss.
That was your miss. Hope you don't have another miss.
My hit would be the Women's Rights National Hall of Fame induction, because that puts us on the map, that gets people into the region, and that is definitely an effort with the revamping of the building. I mean, it is something that people are coming to the area to see, and I think sometimes those of us who live in the area take for granted that it's here. But I have friends who live out of state who are like, wow, that's really neat. Like, that's in your backyard. And it's like, yeah, it is. That is neat. So that's my hit for this time, that, there is good work going on here, and there are things that will continue to draw people to the region. Well,
that's that. We got through that. We survived. So we will be coming back, I believe, in 2 weeks, and it'll be the second week of October most likely, and we will be talking, I hope we will be talking more about some of these regional races, congressional races, things like that. A lot of challengers are popping up out of nowhere. But that's going to do it for this week's pod. Remember, hit that subscribe button if you're checking us out on YouTube, like us on Facebook, and give us a follow on Twitter. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Debrief Podcast.